Hey, what's going on? It's Joey Myers from the Hitting Performance Lab. In this softball hitting tips for beginners video, we're going to answer the reader question, which is a great question actually, of what percentage of my hitters, and he was talking about Joey Myers, me, get no improvement or see no benefit from my program. The second part to his question is how many swings per day, which is too much and which is not enough. So we're going to go over a couple things. We're going to first talk about and address improvement depends on a few things. We're also going to address what is too much and what is not enough practice or training. So great question in the beginning, what percentage of my hitters get no improvement or see no benefit? There's a lot of factors that go into this, and which we'll go over in a little bit, but this is going to happen. There's going to be a percentage of hitters that do not get any benefit regardless of who they're working with. It could be Bobby Tewksbury, it could be Chaz Pippett, it could be Chris O'Leary, it could be anybody. There's going to be a percentage of hitters that aren't going to get any benefit or see no improvement. And again, it depends on a few different things, a few different factors. So I'd be lying to you if I said all my hitters that I work with, both online and local, all of them benefit, all of them are going to be major leaguers, because that's really not the case. I'd be lying to you. And our goal as instructors, as coaches, should be to take those hitters that without our instruction would have topped out at Little League, or topped out in high school, or topped out in college, or topped out in pro ball, to get them beyond where they would have topped out before working with us. That's our main objective. So all hitters that we're going to work with are not going to get to the professional level. It's just impossible for all of our hitters to do that, just because there's different learning styles, there's different motivations and inspirations and things like that. So improvement depends on, really, there's a couple things that we'll go over, and I'll mention those, that us instructors have control over, and then there's some factors that we do not have control over. We can help, we can bring the horse to water, but we can't really make him drink. So the first factor, that's a big factor, that we have somewhat control on, we can help in the department of, but it's really up to the hitter, it's up to the parent to help the hitter, which the parent doesn't really have as much control over either. It's just kind of helping usher the hitter towards that direction. But motivation is one of them, and motivation, as Tony Robbins calls it, is like a warm bath. So motivation is like pushing the athlete in the direction that we want them to go. And then there's inspiration. Inspiration pulls the athlete in the direction they want to go. Big difference between the two. I would rather have more inspiration and have the athlete be pulled than me having to motivate that athlete day in and day out, every day, having to be on their butt, whether it's punishment or reward or whatever. We want to have them be inspired. This all starts with, at an early age, you read books like Arnold Schwarzenegger's Total Recall, and he had pictures of bodybuilders, professional bodybuilders that he looked up to that were Mr. Olympias up on his wall that he looked at, and his mom thought he was gay, turning gay, because he had all these half-naked men, and you got to realize this is back in the 50s and 60s. But I know probably many of you had pictures of baseball athletes that were hitters. For me, it was Don Mattingly, Mark McGwire back in the day, in the late 80s, early 90s. So having these posters, having the fat heads, right? Having the fat heads of Mike Trout or Jose Bautista or Josh Donaldson or whatever all over the room, these kind of lead as inspiration. And now, not all kids are going to be into baseball. I have many hitters. I have a couple that are actually really, really good hitters that don't watch baseball. They just don't. They choose not to watch it. And that's okay. Although it is more of a inspiration if they're watching it, and it's more of a pull than a push in motivation. So there's going to be different hitters in different situations, so you have to treat them in that way. The other factor is we need to make sure that we're teaching effective mechanics. Now here at Hitting Performance Lab, we talk about human movement principles, or rules that are validated by science, and we just apply them to hitting a ball, hitting a baseball, hitting a softball. We have to make sure that we stay close to these human movement rules that are validated by science. If we start going off into the philosophy and the theory sort of things of so-and-so, my grandpappy told me it was this way, or Ted Williams told me it was this way, or whatnot, as long as the foundation is rooted in some sort of science, is validated by science, and not pseudoscience, but physics, body biomechanics, body workers, things like that. We want to make sure it's rooted in some sort of science, or validated by some sort of science that we're teaching. That is effective mechanics. So making sure that we're teaching effective mechanics, and again, this is something that instructors have control over. The other thing that instructors have control over are our effective coaching cues. Okay, so we have different learning styles. As a coach, you out there, instructors, you've probably been around enough that you know that there's different learning styles. VAK, so vision, VAC, auditory, and kinesthetic. So kinesthetic is just feeling. It's a fancy word for feeling. So telling a kid, do you feel that swing? Did you feel impact? That's a kinesthetic cue that you ask them. Did you see that? Or giving them a picture in their head of showing your numbers, because that's something, showing your numbers to the pitcher. That's a visual. Sound cues can be, how did that sound off the bat? Those are different things that different hitters are going to take information where maybe one hitter is a visual hitter and you give them a picture and they got it, and then you give a kinesthetic learner a visual picture and they're like, huh? And they look at you, got a big question mark over their head. So effective coaching cues have to not only go into what that athlete's learning style is, but also they have to be clear and specific. Telling a hitter to get on top of the ball is not very specific. It's very general, it's very broad, and you tell a kid without extra instruction to get on top of the ball all the time, you're going to get this kind of a swing. You're going to get that kind of a swing. Swing down. It's a very broad term, and there's hitting instructors out there that use it very effectively, and that's okay. I use it. I could use it for a hitter that maybe is really uppercutting. So I tell him to get on top, or her to get on top of the ball, and that's going to get them kind of more in the middle where we want them. So we use those kind of cues as adjustment cues, but they're very bad when it comes to being specific. We can't teach our whole team to get on top of the ball because Mike Trout says so, because it's a very broad term. It doesn't really explain what we're trying to do. And Mike Trout is not getting on top of the ball. If you watch, he's the best low ball hitter in the league and the worst high ball hitter in the league. So he's not getting on top of the ball, but he is using that as an adjustment cue. So I do believe that. But what is feel and what is real are two totally different things. Feedback systems are another deal. So video analysis is huge. We have to use video analysis, especially with our younger hitters, because they're not going to believe what it is that what we're telling them if we're just trying to describe to them what we see. What we see, a lot of times our eyes can't catch every little thing, especially during the turn of the swing. So we have to use slow motion analysis. We have to be able to slow the swing down so we can break it down so the hitter can say, oh shoot, video doesn't lie. This is what I'm actually doing. This is what I need to do, giving them a comparison of where we need to move them. So feedback systems are huge. If we're not measuring something, we can't manage it. So what's measurable gets managed. So we got to make sure that we're having those ball exit speed radar gun readings at the beginning. The ZEP app is really good for this. If you're looking for some slow motion analysis apps for your phone, you can either go Huddle Tech, which is formerly UberSense, or Coach's Eye. Either one of those, whether your iPhone or Android, one of those is free, I'm sure, and you can get those online. You can go like on PC, you can look at powerchalk.com, or the other one is RightView Pro, which is pretty popular. The last thing, very, very important, that coaches or parents don't have really any control over. We can motivate, we can inspire, we can give them effective mechanics, we can give them effective coaching cues, we can give them feedback systems, but if they're not doing the work, it doesn't matter. Arnold Schwarzenegger's book, Total Recall, I mentioned earlier, basically the theme of his book is goals, steps, and reps. You as an instructor or coach are basically shining the flashlight in the dark room. You're showing them the pathway to power, where they need to go, but they actually ultimately have to do the work. If they're not doing the work, then it's not gonna happen. So I tell my hitters that tend to maybe go 1 or 2 days a week where they're working on what it is that we worked on that weekend, and I tell them, you're gonna get it, but it's might be a year from now. It could be a couple of years from now. It could be 5 years from now. But if you get into the sweet spot of 4 or 5 days a week, which we'll go into in a little bit here, when we're talking about too much, which is too much and what's not enough, 4 to 5 days a week, working on it, 5 to 15 minutes a day, that tends to be the sweet spot. Now we cut that learning curve from where it could be a year where we kind of get it and fire on all cylinders. It might just take 6 months. It could take 3 months. It could take a month, depending on some of the other factors that I mentioned. So if we talk about leading us into what's too much and what's not enough. Now, I am certified by the International Youth and Conditioning Association, and there are limits to what kids can practice. I mean, not limits as physical, because they can probably go through you could put a 10-year-old through a 3-hour practice, but is that effective? Is that efficient? And the answer is no. So the general rule is, if they're 12U, anything over 45 minutes to 60-minute practices is too much. Way too much for them. You need to be, I can't get everything done, and then, you need to get more efficient with your practices. You need to be more effective with what you choose to practice on. Whether it's throwing, playing catch, whether it's pitchers hitting their spots, whether it's hitting, whatever it is, you have to get more effective and more efficient with your practices to fit them into 45 to 60 minutes. Anything more than that, you're overdoing it. They're overtraining. Even in the weight room with athletes, there's studies that show over an hour of training, heavy training, is too much. So, and this is college athletes. We're not just talking about high school athletes, we're talking about college and professional athletes. So we want to make sure that we're 12U, we're under that mode. Now, when you get into high school, yeah, an hour and a half to 2 hours seems a little bit better, or maybe even 2.5 in high school. College, you're going to see 3 to 4 to 5 hour practices, especially if you got weight room time at the end of practice. You could see a 5 to 6 hour practice day. Now, those athletes, as long as they're getting their nutrients and they're getting their recovery time, they're getting their sleep time, their nap time, all that kind of stuff. If you double training efforts, you have to double recovery efforts. So if you're practicing that much, you need that much in recovery in order to allow that athlete to not be overtraining, because you can't overtrain. Okay, what is not enough? I would say as long as they're going, my recommended time is 5 to 15 minutes a day, focusing quality swings on what it is that you're focusing on. The effective mechanics side of things and the effective coaching cues. 5 to 15 minutes a day. On the low end of 5 minutes, you're talking about probably your 10 U's, your maybe 11 U's, and then your 12 and up, then you start getting into the 15-minute range. Now, high school, obviously, you guys can go beyond 15 minutes, but we have to eat the elephant one bite at a time. So we want to make it to where our goal as a high school player is, okay, I'm going to go 15 minutes. And then after your 15 minutes, you're like, man, I feel good. I can keep going. Then keep going. Add another 10 minutes or another 15, maybe double it, go to a half hour. But be smart with what you're doing. Don't overdo it. And so what you want to do as a coach, and I'll end on this and we'll recap, we want to look for signs of frustration, boredom, and shutdown. You know exactly what those things look like. Everybody is perceptive of picking those signs up, but frustration is an easy one. A lot of times we can see tears welling up in the eyes. At that point, we got to shut it down, and we got to say we'll go back to the drawing board the next day, and we'll come back to it anew. Frustration is pretty easy to spot. Anger, you see these kind of extreme emotions come out. Your boredom, obviously yawning a lot of the time, or tuning out where they're looking around and not looking at you, keeping eye contact. Now that could be ADD, it could be ADHD, it could be something else, but most of the time you know your players. If they have ADD, you know those players, and you got to keep them going. But most players that don't have that, you can see them looking around or yawning. Most of the time they're bored. Okay, so you got to either move on or you cut it and do something different. And shutting down, that's kind of like boredom, but they're just not listening. You can tell they're just eyes glazed over and things like that. So you got to look for those signs. So in this softball hitting tips for beginners video, we answer the reader question of what percentage of my hitters get no improvement or see no benefit from my program. And then we answered the other part of the question was how many swings per day is too much, what's not enough. We talked about improvement depends on 5 things: motivation, inspiration, effective mechanics, effective coaching cues, feedback systems, and doing the work. The last part we talked about too much or not enough. There's a fine line between motivation and inspiration. So again, reiterating, motivation is a push, inspiration is a pull. We want to try and get our players in the pull side, but sometimes they're going to need a push. 12U hitters, we don't want to be practicing more than 45 to 60 minutes a day, or shoot, even 3 days a week is probably tops within that time frame. 5 to 15 minutes a day is my recommendation for hitting. And again, on the low end, you're talking about the younger hitters, the higher end, the older hitters. And then look for signs of frustration, boredom, and shutdown. Make sure that we're swinging smarter by moving better. And before I let you go,
the Hitting Performance Lab wants to know, did you know repeatable hitting power does not start in the hips? Have you heard the expressions, load and explode the hips? Power comes from the hips. Well, we created a free video revealing the results of a scientific study that will show you how we added 48 feet of batted ball distance instantly. And it's not all about the hips. Click here now to get the video while it's still free.